Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us again tonight, wherever you may be. I hope you're all safe and sound wherever you're watching this. A murky day here in Plymouth, but first day of spring tomorrow, people. So winter's coming to a close, and I don't know about you, but I'm happy to see it in the rearview mirror. Um, our speaker tonight is a woman that comes from Worcester, Massachusetts. She's not too far from Plymouth. Brenda Sullivan is the founder of Gravestone Girls. She's going to tell you something about a little different kind of company, a little different kind of project. So, would you welcome our guest tonight, Brenda Sullivan?
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, everyone. Happy almost spring. Yes, broadcasting in from Worcester. I'm come to take you to the graveyard this evening, and we'll jump right in. I have a lot to share with you in the next hour, and hopefully leave us some time for Q&A as well. So, welcome to the graveyard. This is your tour of cemetery art, history, and symbolism with the Gravestone Girls. And there is indeed an S on the end of girls. I am not the only one, but I am the one with the biggest mouth to sit in front of a bunch of people and talk for an hour. So I'm Brenda. That's me standing on that fabulous monument. That is a picture of 3 of the original Gravestone Girls in our natural habitat. Also standing with me is Melissa. She is our webmistress. She keeps us looking good on the internet and all our social media. And then seated is my unconventional conventionalist, Maggie. Mag and I grew up in central Massachusetts. Melissa grew up out in western Massachusetts, and separately and together, we have been traversing cemeteries and graveyards for most of our lives. To the right, you'll see the Gravestone Girls logo. It says the Gravestone Girls mission, which is to keep our dead alive by preserving cemetery art and history. Shameless self-promotion for the website is gravestonegirls.com, and you can also find us on social media at Facebook and Instagram at Gravestone Girls. So Gravestone Girls do a bunch of different things. We do public presentations like this. We want to show you what these spaces are and tell you why they look like they do. We lead cemetery walking tours. So as the weather gets warmer, we get out into the field and take this virtual tour into the real world. We teach proper tombstone cleaning and gravestone rubbing processes. I'm not going to get into that tonight. That's a separate talk in and of itself. But I want you to know there is a right and a wrong way to do it. There's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation. So it's our job to straighten that out so that people go forward with good information and actually help the cemeteries. And then last, what we do, and probably the largest portion of what we do, on the lower right, you'll see our tombstone replicas. So I have an art history and restoration education. I developed a process that I can safely take into the cemetery and collect 3-dimensional images from the faces of those original tombstones. And these are but 4 of probably more than 200 images in our collection. They are elements of the larger stones. They are 3-dimensional casts that can hang on the wall. We also have a line of magnets and a line of chocolate, so you can eat your gravestones too. Everybody is an element of a larger stone. They're all from New England. They're predominantly 17th and 18th century. And they also all come with a history tag that tell you the name of the person, name and location of the graveyard, plus information about the symbol and its meaning. So before we get started, we have to answer 2 basic questions about the origin and the evolution of the cemetery. We need to talk about why we bury the dead and where gravestones come from. So in the upper left-hand corner, that skull represents the idea that 50,000 years ago, and even farther back in time, man has held in different parts of the world, different societies at different points in time, man has held the belief system very often that there's another world after this. We go somewhere when we are done here. And we know that, as illustrated by the photo on the right, by basic archaeology and anthropology. When those archaeologists and anthropologists get into the ground, very often they find burials. And in those burials, we find remains. So in with those remains, we often find grave goods. And this is a very simple looking burial. We've got a few pots in there, pottery, something that deceased would need in the next world. Those vessels may hold food, beads, oils. They might be needed in and of themselves as utilitarian wear, but they are something that's going to be needed by that person in the next world. And when we buried the dead early on, those graves were originally covered with a pile of stones. And the idea was that pile of stones served a couple of good purposes. It showed you where you put someone if you wanted to come back and visit. It showed you where you put someone if you needed to put someone else, you needed to bury someone else, you're not going to disturb the folks that are already there. And it served a very practical purpose of keeping wild animals from disturbing the freshly turned earth of that new grave. So those multiple stones are where we derive the term gravestone. And down in the lower right-hand corner, aren't those big pointy things really just great big giant gravestones? They mark the spot where Pharaoh is buried, and they contain wonderful things that Pharaoh needs for the next world. I can talk about 50,000 years worth of history, no problem. But we don't have time for that, so I'm going to take us to the good stuff. In the next 45 minutes or so, we are going to traverse 400 years through the three major eras of graveyard / cemetery, because there is actually a difference. We use the words interchangeably, but I'm going to show you the evolution of the idea. So we're going to start from first settlement, the colonial period in the 1600s through the 1700s, illustrated on the left. That's a typical burying ground or graveyard landscape of the time. To the right on the top, we have the rural garden cemetery represented there in the 19th century, as well as down below on the right, we've got a very commonly seen modern cemetery of the 20th and 21st centuries. So when you look at my slides, you'll see titles that will tell you what we're looking at. And because you are the Mayflower descendants, I thought I would include some good stuff that is in my collection from Old Burial Hill in Plymouth. So maybe you'll find an ancestor pop up on the screen. Early on, gravestones typically had little or no art. Oh, pardon me on that one. And in fact, if we're putting anything down at all, it's going to be rough stones very, very early on. And I think if you know your folks up in Burial Hill, you'll know that early on the dead did not receive any markers at all, as a way of not signaling how many people were lost that first winter. But if we're going to put anything up early, it's going to be rough stones like this, wooden crosses, depending on the religion. We may have used wooden crosses or other wooden markers, which we would have certainly lost to time and decay. So it's often very easy to walk by old gravestones without even realizing that they're gravestones at all, because they just look like rough rocks. And on the right is an example from Burial Hill of a tombstone for death in 1681 that bears no art whatsoever. This is a last time period, last quarter of the 1600s, when we get slate tombstones that start looking like this. And when you go into these old spaces, and here are two pictures of Burial Hill from a day, that beautiful sunny day I was up there. When you look at these colonial burial grounds, know that what you're looking at has absolutely changed over time. And one of the biggest cues on the landscape is illustrated in that upper left-hand corner. We've got a pretty organized burial ground here. We've got nice, neat rows. Everybody's facing the same way. We'll talk about that. But those nice, neat rows are a big clue that this space has absolutely been organized over time. People come in and clean up for groundskeeping purposes. They come in and clean up or reorganize for aesthetics. And certainly, as illustrated in the photo on the lower right, also Burial Hill, those roads weren't there originally. And when they put in roadways for carriages or later cars or foot traffic, they might have also disrupted the ground for laying in pipe for water issues or all kinds of things. Know that we are absolutely coming in at different times and doing different things to this space that changes the way it looks to us today from the way it looked originally. Gravestones have parts just like anything else. There we go. And on the left, there's a lovely, down in Burial Hill, a very standard colonial New England tombstone. These start showing up on organized burial grounds from the last quarter of the 1600s through the 1700s. The one on the left is slate. The one on the right is sandstone. And if you took Massachusetts and basically divided in half, from about central Mass out to the sea heading east, the majority of our material is going to be slate. If you go from central Massachusetts west and down into Connecticut, the locally available material for tombstones, as well as other building purposes, is most likely predominantly going to be red and brown sandstones out of the Connecticut River Valley. Looking at both of these tablets, they adopt a pretty, it shows we've adopted a pretty common look for the time in terms of it, the way it's structured. So on the left, looking at the slate, or both, follow along, this first little hump there, that's called a shoulder. And then this lunette up here where the art is contained is called the tympanum. And then I've got another shoulder over here. And this becomes a very standard traditional colonial New England tombstone that we are familiar with. Tombstones originally came in two parts as well. So looking at the picture on the top, we have headstones, which are the big ones over here on the left. And then we have footstones over here on the right. And of the time, these folks are religious, they're superstitious, they're following the Bible to the letter. And the idea was they also, in addition to being called tombstones, they were also called New England bedboards. And it is that metaphor for your bed for eternity. So the big ones over here on the left, we're actually looking at the backs of them here. These are your headstones. The body is buried here behind the headstone. And originally, as we see here, we're looking at the back. The writing over here on the other side is facing west. Like I said, the body is back here behind the headstone. And then the idea was if you buried father and he was 6 feet tall, there's a 6-foot spread between his headstone and his footstone. You bury mother next to him and she's 5 feet tall. There's a 5-foot spread between her headstone and footstone. So if you take that idea about spreading them out according to height, looking at this picture on the top, we can go ahead and assume that everybody buried here was all the same height. Now, I can't see you all, but I know you're all probably smirking and shaking your heads, which you are right to do. This is another visual cue that this landscape has been changed along the way. Isn't that space between the headstone and the footstone just about right size for the lawnmower to go through? If we are lucky, those little footstones, they get pushed out and they make what looks like their own row. And if you look down here in the lower left, you'll see that the little stones, we are lucky, they got saved and they got tucked up behind their parent stone. Often they went away. They end up in all kinds of places, patios, walkways, stone walls. They're in the basement, they're on the roof, they're all over the place. And a little thing about footstones, so the one here in the middle is a headstone for Mrs. Sarah. And then behind it is her footstone. So the footstone is going to have something in common with the headstone. It's going to have a full name or initials, something that tie the two of them together. So in addition, if you if you've got a headstone tucked up behind a footstone tucked up behind the headstone, as we see with Sarah, if you walked around the front, if you walk from the front to the back and it's a different name or different initials on that footstone tucked up behind, that's another visual cue to you that this space has indeed been reorganized. So gravestone symbols are Christian-based iconography. They are about the care and feeding of the immortal soul. As I said, these folks are religious, superstitious, really following the Bible to the letter from the first settlement and up through the beginning of the 1700s. So when they start having organized burial grounds and we have standardized tombstones that we're putting up, like this one on the left, we're going to see that winged skull image very often on the top of the stone. It is a very commonly used symbol. It's a very early symbol. It is a message from the dead to the living about mortality and morality. And we're very literal. We've got to reach the people that can read and write. We've got to reach the people that can't read and write. So it's a quick visual cue to get you as a passerby to remember your mortality and check your behavior, because everything you did here was going to contribute to or against the ultimate destination of your immortal soul upon your death. So we use that winged skull to show the idea of being human, because at the time, to carve something into stone that looked human would have been, or angelic, would have been considered a graven image. And that is a very literal interpretation. We use the bones to show mortality. We can't show anything looking human to signify the idea of being human. And what happens from about the 1720s to into the 1730s and even beyond, there's a period called the Great Awakening. And there's a backlash against that very strict religiosity, that very literal interpretation of the scripture, where the slightest transgression might be the difference between heaven and hell. We still have to do our best work while we're here. We still have to do the work that protects that immortal soul. But now, as we see illustrated on the right, that winged skull, that death's head, can grow some skin and look human or angelic without running the risk of being blasphemous by being a graven image. It still means exactly the same thing. That winged soul means exactly the same thing as that winged skull, the idea of being human and the human soul. But now that winged soul is just a more modern symbol of the time to convey the meaning. Here are but a few lovelies, and some of these are in Plymouth as well. There are a couple of local carvers represented here. They can look different from each other, but a winged skull is a winged skull, and it's a winged skull in its meaning. So the hand of the carver will be different, even the same carver from stone to stone, but the meaning will still be the same, even though the images look different. And then here are but a few lovely faces, winged souls. Again, they are the idea of being human. They are not the idea of being the specific image of the person that stone was erected for. As well as, you know, I've told you that the winged skull begins being used in the last quarter of the 1600s, and then the winged souls show up in the 1720s and 30s. There's not a hard dividing line. You will see winged souls prior to the 1720s. You will see winged skulls well after the 1720s, and they will cross over each other all through the 18th century. You don't always get a tombstone when you die, particularly in this time period. So stones are often backdated. They may often come very late. And tombstone cutters aren't just sitting around waiting for you to show up to carve a stone. So they will carve a stone. It will have a price on it in the shop. You pick out what you want. That's already pre-done. And then you paid another amount to have it lettered. The historic records indicates is somewhere between 3, 5, maybe 8, up to 8 cents per letter in carving a stone, lettering a stone. That doesn't mean you can't have one made from scratch, but just know that these symbols are going to wax and wane over each other because of different factors that I noted. And it's the same way as buying a tombstone these days. It's still a very modern idea of translation. There are other colonial symbols other than these souls. There's a few Plymouths in here, particularly that lovely one in the upper left from Burial Hill. There's a lot going on there. I've got a scallop at the top. The scallop is a symbol of the pilgrims, or the idea of making a religious pilgrimage, not the pilgrims from the Mayflower. And I've got death here in the form of a skeleton. Man and his mortality, they have a symbiotic relationship. He's holding his scythe. He is the reaper. And I've got an hourglass with wings down here. He's telling you about the swift passage of time. Another lovely winged skull. Death's head down here. Another hourglass with no wings. And certainly in this one in the middle here on the left, and down below on the left, those caskets, those are toe pincher caskets. And really, nothing says I'm dead or watch out for your mortality because death is coming, like a casket, toe pincher casket on your tombstone. Other symbols we see, and these are but a few, but these are some of the very common ones. This 6-pointed star, a hexafoil, sometimes it has 8. Stars are a guiding light. They are one of the first objects to come into the night sky as the sun goes down, and one of the last objects to leave the night sky as the new day dawns. They're also very easy for carvers to carve, and they're great space fillers. The one in the middle is a little hard to see because he's got some biological on him, but I didn't want you to miss him. This is a sun. So here's the head of the sun and his eyeballs right there on the horizon. And then all these rays coming out from the top. He sits on the horizon because it is the sun setting on this life, but also the promise of the sun rising on the next life. And certainly what else says warning and danger, like skull and crossbones? That is a carver, I believe that's Homer, and he's over in Burial Hill. We get Latin on the stones as well. In the upper left hand, across the top of that tympanum, it is a Latin phrase, memento mori, remember your mortality, think on death. On the right-hand side is a beautiful Latin stone from the 18th century, or a beautiful stone with that Latin phrase across the top of it. And I don't need to know Latin to know what the message on that stone is. Even in the 21st century, I don't need to know how to read Latin. What we have is a tree. You're the tree. Human lives are like trees. They have a definite beginning, a definite end. They're very fragile, and those lives can be interrupted at any time. And you got up one morning and you were going about your business as a tree when your maker came out of the clouds with his hatchet and felled your tree. Hope you were ready. You didn't know it was coming. You knew it was inevitable. You just didn't know it was going to be today. And it was the idea that to be ready all the time, because this might be the last chance you have to do that good deed for society and humanity and for that immortal soul. So then Latin is used on stones because Latin is the language of early Christianity. It's the language of the educated. It is also the language of the law of the time. And we have it in Latin, we have it in English, we have it in pictures on the stone to make sure we reach everybody every time somebody looks at the stone. But don't worry, death is not a permanent condition. Lightly scribed across the top of the tympanum on this beautiful stone down here on the left says the grave is God's hiding place. Death is kind of like God's waiting room. We're there for something very specific. We leave this world, we go into the grave, and we wait for resurrection. This is end game. The idea, the trumpet of Gabriel coming from the east on Judgment Day, sounding the call of resurrection, the dead being redeemed of their sins, and hopefully ascending to the next world. So this is all about the message that life is short, but eternity is forever. Resurrection is forever. Be mindful of where you want to go. Down below, I've got that skull in the middle of that beautiful stone, and the banner around him says, "All must submit to the King of Terrors." Death was known as the King of all terrors, and all must submit. Nobody gets out of here alive. But don't worry, keep reading. Through Christ, we conquer death, rise, and reign forever. The promise that there is more after this. As we leave the 1700s and move into the 1800s, there's a lot going on. We have a revolution. We break away from England. We establish our own nation. And the founding fathers are trying to come up with ideologies for this new world. Who are we? This new nation. Who are we? What do we stand for? And they look back at the very ancient and the very successful civilizations of the Greeks and the Romans, who were the founders of the concepts of democracy and the republic, the idea of the people governing themselves. And while they're doing all that pontificating, there's real-time archaeology that is happening that are bringing these ancient civilizations to light for the first time to the modern people of the time. And one of the things that comes out of the ground that gets everybody's attention is this right here in the middle. This is an urn. It's a cinerary urn. So the urn held cremations, cremains, because cremations were done for thousands of years. It's also a great metaphor for the idea of carrying the body from one world to the next. There is an explosion in neoclassicism that affects the folks of the time in our art and architecture, our style of dress, all of that in the land of the living, but also affects the land of the dead. So we get away from those really sharp and brutal symbols, and we're going to embrace these new modern symbols, and particularly the urn. And you'll see a number of them in these photos here. So we'll see the urns by themselves, and then we also see trees. I've got a good number of examples here. And we talked about what the tree means, and this is a specific tree. This is the weeping willow. By the way it looks and by its name, it is a perfect illusion, a perfect idea of mourning and sorrow. And again, that idea about trees being like human lives. So we may see, as we get into the 1800s, these urns by themselves. We may see them with willows, and we may see the willows by themselves. They're always going to ebb and flow. They definitely become the dominant symbol as we cruise through the 1800s. I've seen very, very few wing skulls or wing soles on stones as we come into the 1800s. If I have seen them, they are just a handful, and they're very, very early 1800s. This living and death motif, that the tree being something living, the urn being something dead, we see them as the dominant symbol in the 19th century. And I'll take one more peek at that, showing you this one right here in the middle on the left. See how the tree is split? That idea, like we saw with the tree and the hatchet, the idea of the tree being split, the life being interrupted, but can you see the little bit of frond coming up through from the split, from that interruption in life? New life will come in the next world. This looks really different. This is a cemetery. This is actually Mount Auburn Cemetery. It's located, it straddles Watertown and Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was founded in 1831 by the Massachusetts Horticultural Society. And this is a time period where we're going through an industrial revolution. We're changing, we're becoming a much more industrialized nation. We're moving away from the farms, we're moving to the cities. The mechanizations of the factories are making life easier. We're not spending all our time just trying to survive. and it affects the land of the living. So of course, we're going to want to separate dramatically from the land of the dead of the 17th and 18th century. And this space gets a complete change. It gets a complete facelift, if you will. It is the first time that we call a place where we bury our dead a cemetery. It comes from a Greek word meaning sleeping place or dormitory. So it's building on that classicism. It's that original Greek word that meant sleeping place or dormitory. And it's taking its cues from the Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. It's also taking its cues from the English garden movement of the time, where you are landscaping intentionally and making beautiful surroundings. And you may notice and possibly think it's odd that the Massachusetts Horticultural Society would be starting a cemetery, but they did it not only to be a place for burial, but they did it to create a test garden and a test arboretum. This space becomes the dominant space of the time. Everything is different. We have green grass, rolling hills, pathways to walk. We are going out here to commune with nature. We're going out here to commune with the dead. So the spiritualist and the transcendentalist movements are happening during this time. And at the time, this space was open green space, 4 miles outside of dirty downtown industrialized Boston. When Mount Auburn Cemetery opens in 1831, it is a tourist attraction, exactly as it is to this very day. And it's very, very influential. And everybody starts doing it. These garden cemeteries become the modern cemetery, the modern burying space of the time. And cities and towns are establishing brand new spaces or changing their landscaping in their existing cemeteries, in their existing burial grounds. And now we call all of them cemeteries, even though we've crossed that time period, we've crossed that time zone, and we'd have a definite evolution from the burial ground to the cemetery. In these newfangled cemeteries, we have the ability for the first time to purchase a piece of land. I call this a home away from home. I call it a vacation home. And it sounds funny, but it's true. So on the top slide, the top picture, what we're looking at is a family plot. So we may mark our land by putting a wall around it, the way we have here. You'll notice it even has a front door and a couple of steps that you go up and you cross through, just like you would in your own real home in the land of the living. And in the land of the living, the family all lives together. And one by one, as they pass on, they move to the family plot in the cemetery, and eventually the family is brought back together. Down below, that picture represents the idea, if you really look across the landscape, we've got a lot of family plots there. They may not be very grand, but you can see that they're delineated with curbing or coping, some kind of foundation that says, this is our space. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I've got a bunch of them. And now all of a sudden I have a neighborhood. These spaces, these new cemeteries were very social spaces. They were very active spaces. People were coming here regularly to tend the family plots. They are coming to picnic. They are coming to socialize, not only with the dead, but also with the living, because all their neighbors are there. Everyone is there on a very regular basis, enjoying these open spaces and remembering their loved ones. Much softer symbols, no more axes, no more skulls. Again, these are but a few, but they are softer symbols and messages. On the top left, I've got a book, might be a Bible, it might be considered the book of life. It might have something written on it, like initials or scripture, or it might even say the Holy Bible, which I have seen. And you'll notice on the front of that little slab, it says, "My husband gone home." And below that, George has gone to rest. The idea of passing from this life, gone home, gone to rest, gone to an easy place. Up above on the top in the middle, we've got a dove. Doves are for peace. I've got a chain here in the middle, and you can see on the left where that chain, that link is broken. And that banner said something once, but it has been eroded away. And very often it will say things like parted below, united above. When someone dies, the family chain is broken, but it will be brought back together and reassembled in the next world. Down below my broken chain, I've got an anchor. Anchors are a symbol of hope. They are also often representative of someone that had an association with the sea, which I have a captain here. So very often in seaside communities and places that made their living from the sea, we often see anchors as not only a sign of hope and as the hidden cross, a sign of religion, but also the sign of somebody that made their living from the sea. This poor creature up here on the right, believe it or not, is a lamb. I know he looks like a blob or maybe a seal, but we'll talk about the material on all of these in a minute. A lamb is the idea of the Lamb of God, very often used for children. Childhood mortality very high through the end of the through the end of the 1800s. A sheath of wheat, the idea of the harvest, the end of day, the end of life. And then down here, I've got some oak leaves and I've got some acorns. There's a whole language of flowers in the 19th century. Oak leaves are typically used for men. The men were the mighty oaks of the family. And the idea of the acorns being his progeny. All of these pictures are the new material of the tombstones of the 19th century. They are marble. We do not have to rely on locally available materials. We have waterways and railroads. We have ocean liners that can bring marble from faraway places, indeed as far away as the beautiful white marble that comes out of Carrara, Italy. It is chosen in these newfangled cemeteries for tombstone material because in and of itself, it is symbolic. It is white and bright and symbolic of heaven and purity. The problem with marble is that it's very porous, so it is very subject to water and wind erosion, which is why the dove is hard to see, the banner is hard to read, the seal looks like a dog or a blob, and also it's very porous and susceptible to pollutants that cause chemical reactions that cause it to discolor. The marble can be cleaned and brought back to being beautifully, blindingly white. And however, once the grains are gone and the images are eroded, those cannot be replaced. So when you go into these 19th century spaces, use your mind's eye to picture what it looked like when it was new and this material was white and bright and these images were sharp and clear on the landscape. So like the trees, we've got other nods to nature as well. I've got a lovely small marble stone that says baby up there on the left, and I've got a flower and I've got a bud. The idea of the bud, the flower that makes the bud, but the bud that never blooms. Down below, Miss Flora Jane. The idea of flowers being fragile like trees, so that head is bent over, that stem often shows a break. These are two ideas of nipped in the bud. These are tombstones with imagery for small children. And the one in the middle where it says gone but still remembered, I've got a full flower where the bud started, the flower bloomed, and then the bloom faded. And often we see a lot of sentiment, a lot of emotion, very typical of the Victorian period, for those small children. And this sentiment says, transplanted by our Father's love, our buds unfolds in heaven. Sentiment for those small children. If you're looking for me, this is where we're going. We're heading up. That finger is pointing the way. That pointing finger in the left and on the top on the right is no different than that winged skull that we saw in the colonial period. It's just the more modern symbol for the time. It points the way, and it promises that there is something else after this. The idea of showing which way we want to go, or hopefully we all will go, and then those shaking hands on the bottom on the right, the idea about meeting again, saying goodbye in this life, but saying hello and being reunited in the next world. This is the third period. This is the modern landscape of the 20th and 21st century. As we come out of the 1800s, we are moving at breakneck speed in terms of industrialization and invention. We are, if you think of all the things you have today, modern conveniences, those are all brand new things as we roll out of the 1800s and into the 1900s. And a couple of things are going along with those industrializations. We start embalming as a result of the Civil War. And it evolves to the point where we give the job of caring for our dead to somebody else. And we also stop dying at home. So we go to facilities to be treated for illnesses, and more we die in those places. And more as we come into the 1900s, the task of caring for the dead is left from the family, taken from the family, and given to the funeral director. And the funeral director's job is to give us back our loved ones looking as alive as possible, just looking peaceful and sleeping. So that takes the idea of dealing with death out of people's everyday experience, and it becomes something we stop talking about. And certainly modern medicine of the 20th century, and certainly of the 21st century, allows us to treat death on a very regular basis. And we don't experience loss the way the people before us did. If you need a kidney, no problem, I can give you one. And if you wait just a minute, just a couple of years, they'll probably just print you a new one. We are beating diseases all the time. We are doing genetic engineering to eradicate illnesses, and it moves at lightning speed. And the result of that in the land of the living translates into the land of the dead. And these modern cemeteries of the 20th century became places we didn't spend a lot of time at. And therefore, the landscape changed. And it changed because modern landscaping, having to mow the lawn and keep the place looking good. We have a certain amount of money and manpower, so we've got to consider that. We've got newly available material through industrialization of granite, so we can have something that is new looking, new on the landscape, and also much more durable. And you put all of that together, and this is the landscape we see in the 20th century. And what I found is when you walk into those spaces, there's not a lot of messages. There's not a lot of people to meet. There's not a lot to learn about the people that you may have existed contemporaneously with, but didn't get a chance to meet. And what I found is that in about the 1980s or so, folks decided that they wanted to take that back. Individuals or families of individuals wanted to leave messages on their tombstones about who they were and what they enjoyed. And now that opens a whole new world of expression, both for the dead and for the living to see and participate in. In the upper left-hand corner, this lovely couple, probably on a golden wedding anniversary or something like that. That's called a photoceramic. It's a photo with an emulsion process, just like developing film, if you all remember film. An emulsion process that puts the photo on the ceramic, and we can then put that photoceramic on the stone. The smiling lady in the middle, that is called an etching. So the lady in the middle, the frog, the stork, the train, and the three on the bottom from right to left Those are all black granite, which is a very popular tombstone material. And they're all done either by laser or by people with diamond tip tools and a lot of talent putting these images on the stones. And these images tell me something about a person. They might be direct, they might be indirect, but it's all for me to make those stories in my head and maybe learn a little something. For the frog and the pelican, I've got somebody perhaps that loves nature. The train in the middle, maybe they collected trains, maybe they were an engineer, maybe they built trains. The owl on the left, perhaps, owls are a symbol of wisdom. Perhaps I have a teacher here. Perhaps I have an owl lover, a bird watcher. Down below on the left, below the owl, I can see your home. I can see that the home and hearth, something that tells me that you liked your home, you like being home, the warmth of the hearth and the closeness of the family. This one here in the middle to the right of the fireplace, if everybody remembers these, is a parking meter. You would think it meant time's up. And without a story behind it, I would think so too. I got lucky. Somebody told me about this gentleman's tombstone, and apparently back in the day, and I mean back in the day, and I remember reading this in older books in like the 20s and 30s, old books and newspapers. One of the things people did for entertainment was they leapfrogged parking meters, and apparently he was very good at it and he enjoyed it. So sometimes I make up a story on my own, sometimes I get lucky and somebody tells me the secret behind the symbol. And certainly that dog right there next to the parking meter, I see your pets. I see your pets all the time. Our pets are a part of our family, just like any other member. And certainly I don't know the man whose tombstone this is on the far right, but I'm very clear about his approach to living and probably a motto that he lived by. I wanted to speak another minute about life in the modern cemetery. It is about inviting the public in and putting money in the bank. We need to keep these spaces open and accessible and enjoyable. I'll put a little disclaimer in here that in the Northeast, these things that you see listed up here, I don't see us doing up here in the Northeast. But as soon as you get out of New England, many, many cemeteries all over the country and internationally are doing these kinds of things to bring the public in and raise money for the cemetery. So certainly beekeeping, they're harvesting the honey. The honey is spoken for long before it leaves the hive. Everybody wants cemetery honey. Gardening club, the one in the middle on the left, those are called cradle graves. I know that's a photo of a lovely cemetery in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. They have 100 of those cradle graves, and it's not about cradles for children. It's the idea of just the structure itself is called a cradle. The cemetery invited the local gardening club in to plant and tend the 100 cradle graves they have in that cemetery, thereby beautifying the landscape from spring until winter. Above the cradle graves is what's called the Canine Corps. It's another cemetery in Washington, D.C., Congressional Cemetery. They have opened the cemetery to be a dog park at certain times of the day and certain days of the month. You pay a hefty fee for your dog, each of your dogs, and on certain days, at certain times, you can bring your dog in and run them off leash through the cemetery. If you do not support their rules, they will know who you are. Your membership will be terminated. You will lose your money. And they're not worried about losing you because they have a 2 to 3 year waiting list. Because honestly, where are you going to find open green space in downtown Washington, D.C. to run your dog? And then certainly all of these other things, weddings and parties, dinner and a movie, invite people in to enjoy these spaces doing something different, or we think it's different. It was certainly always well done in the 19th century. Come in for yoga, come in for a 5K run, invite folks in to gaze at the stars at night. hold a book club and death cafe. So get us to get together and talk about what's become more of a taboo subject in the 21st century. Bring it back in. It's not a straight line. Life is a circle. Cemeteries have swag. They have gift shops. It all puts money in the coffers. In the upper right-hand corner, that is another shot of me in my natural habitat, hawking my wares at Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. They have a market of the macabre. So artists like me making weird macabre stuff, we pay to be there, and they open up the cemetery for about 60 vendors. They invite the public in. They pay anywhere from $5 to $10 a head, and they run it from 12 to 5 p.m. on a Saturday in September, and they get 5,000 people through the gate last year. So think about all of that money that goes right back into the cemetery for landscaping, monument repair, and further education. Technology, we're modern people. That thing over there on the right, underneath my Market of the Macabre photo, you all know what that is. Prior to the pandemic, I had to tell everybody what a QR code was. But the cemeteries recognize that we as modern people, we use mobile apps, we understand QR codes, and they use that to help us navigate the cemetery. You can't get to Philadelphia to take a tour? No problem. Use the app. Do it from your couch. You go to Hartford, Connecticut, and go to Center Cemetery and scan the QR code and download their mobile app tour and take it at your own pace and not be constrained by time and other people's schedules. So that QR code in the middle there is called a memory medallion. It's been enlarged for your viewing pleasure. It's actually pretty close at this point, being that we're on the small screens. And it's made by the Memory Medallion Company in Pennsylvania that holds the US patent for using QR technology for memorialization. So down below that, you will see one of those installed into a tombstone. You will see a woman with a smartphone, and you're in the cemetery, you've come upon one of these, you scan it, and you are brought to that person's website. 999 spaces to do whatever you want. It's your website, it's your memorial content, it's all up to you. You can put your pictures, put your writings, put your achievements, put pictures of your pets, put anything you want. Genealogists, put your genealogy on your memory medallion. And when we scan this particular QR code, we are brought to Mrs. Sarah Buchanan. She is the spokesmodel for Memory Medallion, and we learn a lot about her, and there's much information on her Memory Medallion website. Shades of blue are her favorite colors, daisies are her favorite flowers, and if we keep going through her Memory Medallion website, we find out that she was known for the famous family caramel recipe. There is a 14-minute video on her Memory Medallion website where she is in the kitchen bossing her adult son around, showing us how to make the famous family caramel recipe. This is a way to live on after you're no longer physically here, impart wisdom, impart information, and allows the living to meet other folks. I will tell you that, again, in New England, I have not seen a memory medallion on a stone, but this company has been in business for 30 years or more, and this is their second generation technology. So it is being used outside of New England. We just are as puritanical as we were when we got here 400 years ago. But I want you to know that that kind of modern technology exists for the cemetery. That was a super crash course through 400 years of cemetery history. I left out as much as I told you, and you probably have questions. I'm not sure what we have for time, but I wanted to share with just a little glimpse of who we are, what we do, and that these places are fun, they're interesting, they're educational, they are living art museums, they are living history museums, they are time travel machines, and best of all, they're free. And tomorrow is the first day of spring. The weather's supposed to be good. I invite you all to go out and explore. Enjoy your evening. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me. I have a little bit of time for questions. If you do, I'm here for you. If not, if we're out of time and you have any questions, do be sure. Check out Gravestone Girls at the website. You can email me your questions at any time. Check us out. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brenda. That was awesome.
Thank you.
What
Bye.
a couple of questions. If you've got a question, like Brenda said, here's her website. You know, we got the Q&A thing down at the bottom. What drew you to study gravestones? What attracted you to this? And is it been, you mentioned about being in New England, it's very puritanical, as you just said. Um, has it been a little bit of a uphill climb to try to I don't know, for lack of a better word, demystify a cemetery?
Uh, so I'm a Massachusetts born and bred, always grew up in central Massachusetts. My grandfather died when I was 5, and my grandmother came to live with us. So very much in the tradition of her generation, we were in the cemetery every week. So they were places to play. They were safe places to run around and keep the kid entertained while the grown-ups did their thing. I also grew up in a house interested in art and history. I have an art history and restoration education myself. So that's, I went from spending time there to rubbing gravestones there to then using my art history and restoration education to develop that three-dimensional process of casting. And it's simply Maggie and I started doing it because we just had some of our favorites that we wanted to take home, more than just pieces of paper from gravestone rubbing. And the joke very quickly became, nothing says Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday like a gravestone. So we gave them as gifts. People said, that's cool. Can you make me something? And 30, oh God, I'm gonna have to stop putting numbers on that. 30 years later, here we are. It's been interesting to see the evolution of interest in these spaces. Everyone has always been interested. There used to be a lot of taboo around the idea of, oh my God, I like the cemetery. You like the cemetery too. I have had people say, oh, I thought I was the only one. As soon as people find out what I do, they want so badly. They will tell me their cemetery story. I walk the dog. I watch the birds. I rub the gravestones. I research the people. And what's happened over the years is people still do it, but now it's a whole lot more mainstream. You're not so much of a weirdo to tell people that you like these spaces, because 9 out of 10 people do. There's always one person that when I tell them what I do, they run screaming. Creepy, awful, morbid, what's wrong with you? And the other 9 people are like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. So it's interesting to see that it's become more of a mainstream topic, and appreciated, not just because, we go hang out with the dead people, but again, we're watching the birds, we're researching the people, I've got ancestors or whatever the case may be. 9 of those 10 people have a connection for some reason.
Got a question here. Plot size changed over time, old parts and modern for a couple and infants. Any pattern guide over time or any patterns guides over time or location?
Pattern guides means like written? And we think that's what that is? Or just evolutionary?
I think evolutionary. I think that's what they mean.
Yeah. In the colonial burial grounds, you had places that were more desirable than others, and I get this wrong all the time, but it's like the western corner was where you put the indigents and the suicides, or if you buried the suicides in there, or the undesirables. But it's pretty ad hoc. I mean, take Burial Hill, for example, or any old burial ground like that. if you're looking for the oldest part of the burying ground, what you see now is probably possibly bigger than it once was, but your oldest stuff is typically going to be in the middle and very often on the highest point. It can be seen, but it's more difficult to access. It's a little more protected. And then as that space, that colonial space grows, we start fanning out. We don't, when we get to the 19th century and that change over to the cemetery, it's called a garden or a rural garden cemetery. And it is very thought out. It is very plotted. Like I said, it is the first time you have the ability to actually purchase a piece of land. So the cemetery will have plot plans and you will buy plots, you know, in Mount Auburn and many of these places even to this day. But I use Mount Auburn. You can buy a space in the Dell. You can buy a space over in the green pastures. Those 19th century cemeteries will have street signs like we have in the land of the living, and it's Petunia Path and it's Daffodil Row, and you know, it's all very much the idea of organization, but natural organization, because we are supposed to not just bury our people in these places, but we are also, the living is also, are also supposed to wander those paths and commune with the dead and commune with nature and become part of it without staying permanently.
Question here. The oldest graves they have found in New England are Connecticut brownstone monuments from the 1640s. Are those original or replacements?
That is a fabulous question. So there's a lot of controversy about some of that stuff. There are three stones I know of that they're considered to be the oldest. And there's that Connecticut one. There's one in Ipswich dated 1840 something, and I can never remember what the other one is. I think on the brownstones, it's generally accepted that they are later. They're either later replacements or later redo. Brownstone is a more fragile material, but also it's a more fragile material that doesn't necessarily have a terribly long lifespan comparatively to other geological materials. But it's also it's just not part of the vernacular of the 1640s to be putting tombstones like we know them up. A lot of times those come later. Might use original stone, we might backdate them. But within the tombstone community, there's a lot of controversy whether those 1640s stones are literally 1640, or if they are later stones that are backdated. And they could be 60, you know, they could have been put in there in 1680 and backdated to 1640. It doesn't mean that they're brand new. But the question within the tombstone community is, are they legitimately 1640? It's a great question. I don't have a real answer, but it doesn't mean that they're new, but they could easily be backdated as well.
Do each World War or Civil War gravestones have specific designs on them?
World War and Civil War, is that what you said?
Yeah. Do each World War and Civil War gravestones have specific designs on them?
Sure. I could do a whole program just on war stones, which actually is a really good idea. Civil War stones, you see flags, cannons, banners and cross swords, not helmets, but hats, the military style hat of the time during the Civil War, the belts that carried the swords. A lot of that has to do with rank, and you'll often see symbols that will then say, you know, Colonel so-and-so or Private so-and-so, or, you know, the Civil War stones will give you a lot of information about about the individual, their regiment, their rank, where they fought, maybe where they died. And we see a lot of flags. I see a lot of American flags on them, folded, so the idea of the flag blowing in the wind. And certainly World War One and World War Two, well, Spanish American, World War One, World War Two. There are, I see a lot of flag markers for Spanish American. I see tombstones for Spanish American War. I can't think of any specific symbols for that, but on the World War One and World War Two stones, we're firmly into the granite materials typically. I'll say one more thing about that too. But you have modern tombstone makers that you have the ability to choose any kind of symbols you want. So I might see the fighter plane that the person piloted, or the mission that the plane flew, in either of those wars. And certainly, if you served in the military and were honorably discharged, and it doesn't matter what war you served in, whether it was the Revolutionary War or whether it was Afghanistan, if you were in the military and were honorably discharged, you are entitled to a government stone. You might be familiar with the military cemeteries with all the white, like Arlington National Cemetery, with all the white rows of same size tablets. And you used to only be able to get crosses on them, but now over the years, the government has opened up a number of available symbols for different secular and non-secular religions.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this tonight. This has been awesome. I really have learned a lot.
Thank you.
I love your passion. This was. I'd like to think of myself that I would be one of the 9 people that would say like, "Oh, I'm not the one." So it's been
Great.
it's been
I
great to
run
meet
into
you.
very few of those one of those ones.
It's been great to meet you. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing. Continued good success. Thank you
Thank you.
everybody for joining us tonight. Again, her name's Brenda. The company's name is Gravestone Girls. You see her website there. Thank you, everyone. Brenda, thanks so very much for doing this. And
My pleasure.
everyone, happy spring. Stay safe, and
Indeed.
we'll see you in the spring.
Thank you. Have fun. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.